Hi, I'm Jean Palin, and you are tuned in to Old Women Who Write, although I'm with someone who isn't as old as she could be. Hi. Welcome, Anne. I'm glad you're here.
I'm happy to be here, Jean.
And how can I get more of you on camera? I'm just get you from here up. There we go. Yep. Can you do
Is
that
that
again?
okay? Is that okay?
It's better. It's better. It's otherwise it looks like I'm talking to a talking head.
I know all, you know what? Wait a minute. I have to hit okay. Is that good?
That's great. Don't you love how you're on the inside of how this all works, folks? Because this is not going to get edited. Okay, so, um, and I welcome you here. I want to ask you first, before we get into talking about Mattie, Milo, and Me, your book, I want to talk a little bit about you. Is this your first book ever?
This is my first book ever. My second one is coming out September 23rd, 2025.
Oh, exciting. And but have you been writing your whole life?
Um, well, my father announced when I was applying to colleges pretty late in the process that if I was not a chemical engineer, if I didn't major in chemical engineering, they would not pay for college. It was a ploy by my mother to keep me close to home. I can't add three numbers together. I'd never gotten above a C in math or science, which I pointed out to him with, and he wasn't someone that you talk back to, and he said, we're older than you, we know better. And all I wanted was for my parents to love and respect me, and I would do anything that they asked me. So I went to Tufts University and I majored in chemical engineering. And every semester I'd go to the library, open up a textbook and say, you can do this. But by the middle of the first page, my mind was numb. But no one was worried that I was going to throw them off. You know, I was going to get the A on the curve. So there were four women and 20 men. And it was a really nice group. So I would write the lab report. I hated slogging around in the boots in the basement of the building doing the labs.
Right?
So they would do all that and then they'd give it all to me. And I loved organizing and writing it. So I got through with a lot of help. And at the end of senior year, I went to see if I'd passed my courses and was actually going to graduate. And I was so excited when I found out I had, and I went running to a payphone to call my father. And I said, did it, I'm graduating. I am a chemical engineer. And he doesn't usually laugh, but he uncharacteristically, he chuckled. And then he said, now I can write that article for Science magazine about teaching a monkey to be a chemical engineer. Yeah, I
Oh,
had to lean
oh,
against the
Anne.
phone booth to keep myself from collapsing.
I,
But
oh, Anne, are you
so
ready?
anyhow, I worked for several years. I worked for a few years as a chemical engineer, but I'll tell you, I thought maybe working would be different because you were getting paid. It was finite number of hours, but I didn't like it any more than the schooling. And then I got an MBA from the University of Chicago, but I didn't like spreadsheets any more than chemical equations. So, and I had never heard of anything of something called an interest pattern until I had kids, because my parents had just controlled everything I thought, said, and did. And I just wanted them to love me. So I did it all. But after my second son was born, I just thought, I'm not going back. My husband could support me. I'm not going back to work until I figure out what my interests are. I mean, and I saw a therapist. At one point, she said to me, you are now at the kindergarten level of interest patterns. And then one day I read Picturing Will by Ann Beatty, and the protagonist was a photographer. And she would go into all these things and be a fly on the wall, which was the only thing I like to do. So I thought, well, okay, that's what I'm going to be. And I studied photography for 2 years. I liked it, but I didn't like having the camera between me and the subject because I just wanted to be talking and asking, and I didn't like fiddling with the camera. I hated the dark room. I just wanted to be with the people. And then after 2 years, this one boy, there was like 18, who was really good. He said, you should spend more time in the dark room. And I had spent my whole life doing things I should. So when I heard that, So I went and asked the creative writing teacher, it was a community college, if I could sit in on her class. It was 3/4 of the way through the semester. She said yes, and I sat down in that classroom, and oh my goodness, I had never, I was home. They were talking. I remember there was, I'm not in, they were, I'm doing a poem, and in the poem, the person was on the highway and cars were passing each other. And there was a comment about you would never see these people. And I'm like, oh my God, other people think about these things. So I started, and I thought I'll learn how to write stories to go with my photographs. But then I just liked writing, and I got an MFA at the New School in 1999, and that was kind of, but I had terrible, terrible writer's block with, like, if an editor said, go in your backyard and write 5,000 words about that tree, I could do it, no sweat, because someone said that was important.
Uh-huh.
But anytime it came to writing anything about myself, I just I just collapsed on the floor because, among other things, growing up at the dinner table, my father would say every night, you can listen, but don't speak. And if I ever did try to say, even as an adult, if I said anything to him, he'd say, I don't want to talk to you. You have nothing interesting to say. So it was really hard for me to sit there on my own um, until recently. And that's sort of the topic of my
Well,
second. So my second book is kind of about that.
good God, woman. You are just, whoa. Um, so no, you haven't been writing your whole life, is the answer to the
No.
question. And I'm just fascinated with this route that you have
And
taken.
then, and actually what happened was in 2016, I moved with my husband was for what was supposed to be 4 months to Chicago, where he was visiting he's a professor at the University of Chicago. And it was 8 degrees outside. I had signed up for, I don't know any, I signed up for improv. You go to Chicago, you try improv.
Yeah.
And I pretty much was a disaster. It was hard. I mean, I loved watching the people. They were amazing. These young kids, a quarter my age. And after it was pretty disastrous, I went home one day, and my new dog walker was there. And I said, what do you do when you're not walking dogs? She said, well, actually, a whole there's these open mics across the city of storytelling. I host a storytelling open mic. I had never heard of storytelling before. She said, you should come. I'm like, well, I'll come. She goes, you should tell a story. I said, I'm not telling a story, but I had this once, I had just come back in 2014, and this is the topic of my second book. I had been teaching at the Community College of Philadelphia, and the 5th week of my 5th year there, or 6th year there, the classroom violence, I'm not easily intimidated, but it was just horrendous, and I wasn't getting any support. And one day I walked out and thought, that's it. The 5th week of the semester, I'm never coming back. But I suffer with severe depression. I've had ECT 3 times, been hospitalized twice. I knew I was going to be in trouble without structure and focus. And driving home, I needed something. And then before I even got home, I thought, I know, I'll go to Australia in February in 5 months and see Bruce Springsteen. And let me just back up to say that a year earlier, I hadn't known what a Bruce Springsteen was. I had never been to a concert. We didn't do fun when I was growing up. But my son and daughter-in-law had come to visit us in Philadelphia because she wanted to see Bruce Springsteen. And they said, do you want to go? I said, no. But then I ended up going just because I wanted to spend time with them. And as I say, as the crowd mysteriously rose in unison, I rose too. And up on the screen was the face of a man with the biggest, kindest smile I had ever seen. And for the next 3+ hours, that man's energy, humanity, and enthusiasm lifted me. For the next 3+ hours, Bruce Springsteen made me feel like I had a chance. So the day I quit my job, I'm 60 years old, even though I hate to travel, I hate to be alone, I went home and I booked that trip. 26 days, 5 different cities, 8 concerts. And I told the travel agent, all I want to do is work out, see 8 concerts, and write. And I was surprised that I said write, because I hadn't been thinking of all the years I'd been teaching at the community college. I had just been happy teaching other people to write. But somehow the will the will to be happy and to survive had just bubbled up and it just came out. So fortunately, 12 of my family and acquaintances told me, and let me write to us and tell us about what you're doing. And that was all I needed. So 3 hours or 4 hours a day, I would sit there after breakfast, after my newspapers, and I would just write. And I was ended up, this wasn't the whole thing, I ended up being in the same hotels as Bruce Springsteen and much of the E Street Band. But I wrote about what I was, and I didn't leave the hotel because I liked being a fly on a wall, but I'd never been an A-list fly on an A-list wall. But, and I wrote, oh my God, I love, the hours would just fly by. I ended up with about 1,000 pages of emails. So I get to Chicago and I knew I had one story, that this trip to Australia, and I didn't go to change, but I came home. I was a force to be reckoned with. I realized, because people in Australia had said, the young people would say, what are you doing here? Oh, I wish my mother would do that. My mother retired. We can't get her off the couch or so. All these positive things that people at home just rolled their eyes like, oh, it must be nice to go to Australia. I was fighting for my life. I wasn't having ECT again. I wasn't going back inpatient. And I came home with a ball of energy, like this Bruce Springsteen and positive comments energy. And I was determined not to lose it. And people, they would really, they rolled these friends and they only wanted to see me as a depressed person. But now I realized I wanted them to see the real me and they couldn't. And my husband, we'd been married 35 years. For 2 years, we were literally throwing dishes at each other. We had divorce lawyers. I mean, it had a happy ending. So anyhow, I get to Chicago and I know I have one story to tell about Australia. So I made it into a 7-minute story. And then people, the thing about storytelling is you get up in an open mic and they give you positive feedback. So it's not like writing where you're just sitting there by yourself. So I started doing it more and more, and people started asking me to be in their curated shows. So I contacted this woman after about a year. I wanted to hone my skills. I didn't know what I was doing. And the first thing she said to me was, if I could wave a magic wand, what would you wish for? And I thought, she took me by surprise. I thought she would want to know my goals as this. And I said, to write a book. And she said, well, then that's what you have to do. And I knew she was right. I fought myself for 4 months. For 4 months, I didn't sit down. I'm getting the chills remembering this. And finally, I was I was so angry at myself for not doing it. And I work out every single day. That's how I deal with my depression. So finally, I said, look, you don't question working out. You just sit down, you get on the bike, you do it. You don't question it, and you feel better. So after I worked out one day, I went up to my desk. I looked at the clock. It was 11 o'clock. I said, you're going to sit here for 2 hours. And now, mind you, I had these emails in a binder, which when I looked at them 6 months after the trip, I had to shut them right away because there was such energy and I talked about deep things and, but then I had been so naive. I thought I was going to come home and my friends were going to want to hear my stories.
Right, and
So
it
I
would be that
couldn't
way
read those
forever.
emails. But, 2 years after that, I looked and so I wrote this manuscript, which will be published on Bruce Springsteen's 76th birthday. And it started out 1,000 pages because I would just, anything that came into my head, I couldn't question it because then I would end up with nothing. So anything that basically had happened in my life until that point was in that 1,000 pages.
Okay, hold, hold, hold,
Sorry.
hold, hold.
Okay.
Okay, I pushed the go button. Now I'm pushing the hold button.
Okay.
We could, you know, I want people to read your book, this book that you got to through a most amazingly complex route I have heard in many years.
And that happened in the middle of writing the other one.
Okay. All right. Folks at home, Mattie, Milo, and me, I want to say something about this book before we get started. and I think what I have to say will be welcomed by Anne, although I'm not, who knows. I have to tell you, this book came to my attention through a publicist that Anne has. And I was thrilled because it's the first time someone has contacted me and said, would you do an interview? And then when I saw, well, it's about dogs, I thought, oh God, I'm so sick of the dog books and movies about miracle dogs, dogs that are just really furry humans, or dogs that are angels in disguise. I probably would not have picked up your book, on my own had I known it was about, yes, her and her two dogs and how they saved her sanity or whatever. I would not have. I'm so grateful that I did because, yes, there are two dogs are major characters in this book. However, it's really a book about a human being and the depression she had suffered for most of her life, and the effect and the interaction between her, these two very different dogs, her family, her husband. And it's a story that I have not read anywhere else. And it's a story that made me think about our interactions, not just with humans, but with animals in general, with animals. The other thing I want to say is that I have never lived with, I have never had serious depression, clinical depression. So it's hard for people who haven't to understand it, to really understand what it feels like. And so for me, I learned so much about clinical depression. And I admired so much that you're vulnerable enough to reveal the effects of it on you and your life, that I have to tell, aside from the fact that you're really a very, very, very good writer, I want others to read this book, not because of cute animals, because of what you're revealing and teaching, and you allow others to experience with you in this book. Now, this is going to be hard for you. In a couple of sentences, what do you think Mattie, Milo, and Me is about?
I think it's about exactly what you said. And the publisher titled it, the publisher put two dogs on the cover.
Yeah.
So, so it's kind of been an uphill battle trying to get people who haven't read it to see that it's not, and I don't want to put down books about dogs to say it's not just a book. It's a book about coping with life,
Yes.
and, and the cards were dealt.
Yes. Yes. Um, it struck me, and we'll talk about the dogs in just a minute, but it struck me that even though you were living, you're in a place in your life where depression was a major player, and you knew it, you were very aware of it, that you managed, and I could feel it from your book, you managed to create a very nurturing environment for your sons. And that could not have been easy to do. And I wanted to tell you that I admired what came through with your sons and your husband, both. I have the feeling, went up and beyond yourself to do that. Am I right?
That was my goal in life, was that my children would not, I wanted to stop, the buck stops here, I used to say. And my first goal was that they would, and I talk about this in the book, individuality, that they would figure out, I would help them figure out who they were and where they wanted to go. And that gave me energy. I mean, and at that point, that's what gave me energy in those days. I mean, they were great kids, and just helping them, enabling them to be who they wanted to be, not who I wanted them to be or who anyone else wanted them to be. And that really gave me, and it was almost instinctive once I started. I just knew, I realized, it took a while, but I realized that how I felt. I didn't know I was depressed until I was in my 30s and went to a therapist. I was shocked.
Hmm.
I didn't know this was depression.
Right,
Um, so
right.
I just so much wanted them not to have to go through this.
Okay, so for those of you out there, and I'm not giving a plot away, um, you all had a family dog named Mattie, who Mattie was a Wheaten Terrier, but I would say a golden retriever type dog, who just wanted to give love and get
That's
love, give
exactly right.
love.
No work. We didn't even have to take her for a walk.
Right,
No work.
right.
I for 10 years I had said no to my son because I didn't want a dog. And maybe it was, from past thing, my father throwing our dog down the stairs and killing, maybe it would. And finally, when he was 10 for his birthday, I was going to get him a African hedgehog. He's like, all right. But then the owner of this pet store, when I called for directions, said, you have to wear rubber gloves. It's basically a porcupine. So, what was I going to do? We had enough of that stuff. But the minute I met this 10-month-old Wheaten Terrier, and I don't shop for anything, but I made sure, I looked that one up in the book when my son suggested it, and it did everything but empty the dishwasher. I fell in love with her on the spot, on the spot. I mean, that was it. It was true love. So
So she was the perfect dog
she was
for her. So she was tragically killed, hit by a UPS truck. Was it UPS? Yes.
10 days before Christmas,
Yes. Just,
delivering a present for my son, bar mitzvah present for my son, from my mother, who was diabolical. She took such pleasure when she found out it was her gift that killed the dog. I mean, that's in the book.
oh
She
God.
tell that story, so she was quite a number.
Yes. Um, so the shock, a shocker to me in the book, and again, reader, this happens in the first couple of chapters, so I'm not giving away a plot. Um, but very quickly you decide you must get another dog. What was you must just immediately after
I
this
am
death.
I
Why?
am a very proactive person. It's how I cope with my depression. I mean, I just have to be moving. And there was going to be this void. And I'm very much like, I didn't want to look at the spot where Mattie used to. I needed a distraction. I'm just, everyone grieves differently. I've had people say you shouldn't have done that, all sorts of things. I needed distraction. I knew it wasn't going to make me miss Mattie less, but I just needed something. I have a lot of energy and I just needed, so that's the next day and my kids wanted to grieve. The two younger kids, they needed time to grieve, but we called my therapist. We said, is this going to make them think that living beings are replaceable? And she said, they're old enough to know that, and they're secure enough to know that's not true. And you're always giving to them. This is a chance for them to possibly give back to you. And we went and picked them up at school and we explained it. And they were said, we understand, Mom, we wouldn't do it, but we understand you need this.
Gotcha. So you go immediately and adopt this dog who on first greeting seems to be just as mild-mannered and sweet until a few days later or a day
Oh,
or two
until the
later,
next day when the guy drops them off. We called him Mellow Milo the day we met him.
who turned out you believe had been drugged by the adoption person in order to get the
Placed with
dog.
3 families in 18 months. I mean,
Yes,
so,
yes.
yes.
So what you ended up with going from the perfect dog to the dog who was hostile and biting the hand that fed him, and runaway and horrible and outrageous and ungovernable, is what you got. And the meat of the book, the bulk of the book, is about your relationship with this dog who you did years of dog training and what it did to and for you and to and for the dog. I mean, it would seem to me there was equal growth that
Mhm,
came
mhm.
for both you and Milo through that process.
Mhm.
Talk to me a little bit about why did you keep going to training? Why didn't you give the dog back?
That's really, it's a great question. And I will tell you, it wasn't until doing book talks and after the book came out and talking to people that I really realized the deep down reason. But when he was just I mean, I told my kids before we got our dog, you're going to walk them. I don't want to. And they're like, oh, sure, 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 which wasn't a problem with Mattie. But then we get Milo, he needed, oh my God, hour, forget the training. And then even afterwards, an hour in the woods every day. And I hate the woods. But even in those first few days when I realized what a monster he was, but I never thought of giving, I just pictured him on the bed of rags. I couldn't do it. And I never questioned it. I never ever, there was one time when he pulled me in front of the school bus the first few days, and I thought about taking him back, and I screamed at him, and I told him I hated him, but I didn't. And people would comment. I mean, people, oh, later when he was better, they would say, oh, man, it was amazing. And I never, but I realize now as I'm talking to people about the book and about my parents, when from as far back as I could remember, my mother would remind me, I was only 22 when you were born. I didn't want to have you. I had other things I wanted to do. So I knew what it felt like not to be wanted. And no one had wanted Milo, and no one had taken the time to help him. So, I didn't I didn't go through that process when
Yeah,
I just kept him because I couldn't live with myself. Didn't know if I could live with him, but I just knew I couldn't live with myself if I gave him back. But now I realize as
retrospect, you
I've
see
come
it.
to people, not just about the dogs, but about my family history, that's, I'm sure, what was driving me there.
Yes, yes.
It was
Wow.
my little way of making good on what had happened to me or something.
How many years did you have Milo?
10 years. We had him for 10 years. And then one Monday, I took him to the dog park and he wouldn't get out of the car. And I rushed over to the vet. They took him in, they x-rayed him. And then I'm sitting in the waiting room with him. It was just the two of us and then the secretary and the receptionist who we knew really well. And the phone rang and her face just gasped and she went running out and she came back and she said, you can go in. And the vet showed me, he put the x-ray up on the light box and I can't read x-rays, but he said Milo had cancer from his butt all the way up to his brain. That was Monday. And he said, take him home. I had cancer. I said, can't you do something? No. So, and Friday morning, we put a stake down in front of him. My husband went and he wouldn't do it. So my husband took him
Yeah. Um, and am I right that you got two
the
dogs
next day.
the
The
next?
next day.
You have a pattern.
I have a pattern, yes. And yes, I only went for one, but the same man who sneaked Milo on me, I didn't hold it against him. I didn't, people were, weren't you angry at him? You know what? It was so much energy working with Milo. It wasn't constructive to be thinking about him and what he had done. But I went back. First, when I called, it was a Friday around 6. I said, oh no, you can't come in tomorrow. We have to book you, but I talked my way in. We got there. I found this perfect little dog. He said, this is the present for taking Milo. It was just this perfect little dog. And as I'm about to leave, he said, well, let me show you this dog. And it was a little Chihuahua with a heart on his back. And I have to tell you, and that he died in April. He was 19 and a half.
Oh,
It was he was the most amazing little dog, but he makes his appearance in the last pages of the book.
yes, yes. Um, I I I read I started to call it MM and M.
That's what I call it.
It's
Yes,
easier than Mattie, Milo, and me. And
yes,
met
that's what I
him
call
about at least a month and a half ago, and I had forgotten. During all of these years, were you in some form of therapy for the
Yes,
depression?
yes, um, way back when my oldest son was 5, I was driving to school, him to on the 10-minute ride to school, and 3 minutes in, he told me he forgot his lunchbox, and I started screaming at him. Then I pulled over to the side of the road, and I was just sobbing, and I was apologizing. And I had just moved to Philadelphia a couple months earlier, and someone had given me the name of a therapist to talk to about, she was good with career changes, because I knew I needed that. But I was never, I don't know when I would have ever called her. And I just made an appointment. I had never been in therapy. I didn't know. And I went there, told her about the lunchbox incident. And then she said, and I didn't know what to say after that. And she said, well, tell me about your mother. And it's absolutely true that there there hasn't been a silence since to this day. And she actually was instrumental, and she helped me figure out the writing piece of my life. And when I was writing that first manuscript that's coming out next year, and then it was during the lockdown of the pandemic, and the editor had it, and it was taking forever. And this therapist kept saying, write about Milo. I'm like, I don't want to write about Milo, write about Milo. Went on for ages.
Yes.
I'm locked, stuck in my house. And then I found 50 pages I had written 15 years ago. And I started with that, got through a first draft. And then, you know what? It was a more straightforward story than the other one. So I just called the
Yes.
editor and said, let's work on the Milo story, try to get that one out, and then we'll go back to this. So that's how
Gotcha.
that happened.
And it is, I want to say, a very straightforward story. There's no romanticism in here. There is no romanticizing the experiences. When you say, I was under the dining room table, crying, I know you were under the dining room table crying. Um, I think from the point of view of people who are out there with clinical depression, I think your book would be so very helpful. There happened to be dogs in it who played a huge role, but the book itself, with your
And
experience,
actually, the second book, which the working title is A Sunny Day, Bruce Springsteen and Me. I don't think the publisher's going to let me keep it. The me is a little too cute with Milo and me, but there's actually a chapter about being in the psychiatric hospital. I was there twice, and I mean that also
will help.
that yeah.
That's good. All right. We are well over time, by the way. Just I want to
Okay.
say this. So I have to bring this to a close, but I will before I bring it to a close, I want to say a couple of things. First, you've all gotten the book name. We've said it 10 times, Mattie, Milo, and Me, a memoir. It is available on Amazon and all the usual suspects and probably at your local bookstores. What do I know? You have a website called
And Anne, Abel, Abel, author.com. You can also, it's linked to all the, indie bookstores, Amazon.
Got it. And I will say that Ann and I have in common that we are two of the older people on TikTok and we have very different approaches on TikTok, but we're both really enjoying it. I want to encourage all of you out there, no matter what you've heard about TikTok, get on TikTok and look for older people, older women particularly, because there are many inspirational and educational women on TikTok that you need to be hearing from. And finally, Anne, I want to say that for you and for me, that the best thing that readers can do when they read a book they like is to go on Amazon and put a review on there. Now, when I say put a review on there, it's as simple as you can just put 5 stars, assuming you love the book. 5 stars or 4 stars, or let's say five. 5 stars. You don't have to write a word. That's number one. Number two, you can write whatever you want, but I've heard people say they are intimidated by reading reviews like, oh, this book brought forth of this, and you can just say, I love this book, or this book spoke to me, or one sentence if you want to. There's a rumor that you have to have bought the book from Amazon to do a review. Not so. If you did
Not-
buy it from Amazon, they will put a little star on there that says verified purchase, but you don't have to have bought it from them. And finally, the reason it matters. If a writer gets 50 reviews on Amazon, Amazon will start supporting your book. That's already happened twice for mine, is that they will like give it away free with something or for a lower price, and that they will help promote the book. And the more after that I've heard, but I don't know yet, that after 100 reviews, they really step it up. I'm not there yet, so I don't know. But I want to encourage you for Ann Abel. Is it Abel or Abel? Abel?
Abel. Uh-huh.
And for me, do a review on Amazon. As soon as I get off from here, I will be writing a review for Anne for
Thank you very much.
MMM. So Anne, thank you. You're fascinating. You're a great interview, and keep
Thank
writing.
you. It was really a pleasure.
I'm looking forward to your next book. For
All
those
right.
who don't recognize it, here it is. Ta-da! So
Thank you.
thank you, and thank you all for tuning in, and see you next time. Okay, sorry, it took me a minute to find it. Um, I think I'm on pause and I have to stop it. Okay, so thank you. That was a
Thank
lot of
you,
fun.
Jane. Oh, good. I'm glad. I know I kind of went on a little bit, but you were asking about things that were, you know,
Yeah, yeah. I'm just, there are people who you meet like you, and I have a friend who was sexually raped by her father for years, and who, when she and her mother and sisters and brothers were beaten regularly also by her father, and when she turned like 14 and he lost interest and started with her younger sisters, she turned him in to the police and he went to prison, which resulted in her mother having a nervous breakdown and leaving the family. So she had to take over the family. And with all of her father's relatives, never speaking to her, attacking her. She's my best friend in the world. And when I look at people who have had the kind of backgrounds that you've had, it is a wonder to me that you are sane. It is a wonder to me that you're a contributing human being. Do you know?
thank,
So I want you to know
thank
that.
you very much. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
All
So
right. Well, I'm going to go order your book, okay? So I can leave you a review.
sure. Yay. Thank you. Thank
All
you.
right. Thanks. And we'll talk again with the next book,
Yes,
okay?
and this should be up within the next 2 weeks, and I will notify you when it's up.
All right. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Have a good
Yeah.
day.
Bye.
Bye-bye.